Welcome to the Red Med podcast, Rescue, Expedition and Disaster Medicine, where we provide a platform for healthcare professionals working in or aspiring to join rescue, expedition and disaster response teams. A platform to share information, advice and opportunities and connect like-minded Red Med individuals in our community.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to episode 32 of the Red Med podcast, Rescue, Expedition and Disaster Medicine. Today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Colin Smart from TSG Associates. Morning, Colin. How are you doing?
Good morning, Chris. I'm very well. How are you?
Very well, thanks. All set with a good coffee.
Likewise.
I'd like to say long time no see, but we've been speaking a fair bit recently, so it's nice to kind of continue the conversation a bit. Colin, we've worked together on and off for a number of years now, and we've used your products. I've used your products in the deserts of Iraq, the mountains of the Andes, the jungles of Guatemala. Absolutely fantastic, robust products. But before we get into that, just to add a little bit of context for the listeners, can you give us a little bit of background as to your career and where you started, your interest in medicine, etc.?
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. And I'd just like to say that thank you very much for inviting me on. So a bit of a varied history that I come from. At the moment, I'm the founding partner of my company TSG Associates, and I'll be able to cover what we do a little bit later on. But my sort of interest in remote area medicine started as a military medic. I joined the army when I was very young at 16, but I was very lucky to work with some of the most specialist units in the British Army, and through my work with those units, that I was going to incredibly remote places with fairly large numbers of troops, up between 60 and 80. And you can say I was lucky or unlucky enough, I was the only medic on the ground. And I think that's what's really fueled my passion for remote area medicine. And I think in two ways as well. One, you do all your preparation for your trauma and make sure you obviously got that completely boxed away. But what also fascinated was doing really good primary healthcare in extreme environments. And that's something I think is a hugely important part for the remote medic. So I did 9 years with the military. I also had active service in the first Gulf War. When I left the military, I worked in the North Sea as a platform medic again. Again, maybe not as austere, but again, quite remote, one medic with virtually, and certainly in the days I was working at, there was no telemedicine. You know, you had a phone call link and your hands to make your diagnosis. So there wasn't a lot of technology and support behind what we were doing. So it was, again, trying to have the skill so you could make safe decisions on what you were dealing with in difficult places at times. Yeah. Once I finished in the North Sea, I actually went off to Coventry University to study a degree in disaster engineering and management, and that was a Bachelor of Science degree. So that's really, I suppose, my history. Outside of my history, I do love expeditions. I don't do quite as many as I'd like to at the moment. And I suppose my biggest one to date is traversing the Greenland ice cap unsupported, which was a 25-day man-haul across the ice cap, which was an incredibly successful and happy expedition as well. And as we've talked about earlier, Chris, I think the ultimate endurance is dad of two. So I'm on that job at the moment. So quite a lot of diversity, but I hope that I'm passionate about remote area medicine and experiencing the highs and lows that we all go through that when we do it.
Absolutely incredible. What an amazing career. Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Colin. It's funny you mentioned that. I was on the WEM podcast the other day, World Extreme Medicine, talking about the different facets of remote medicine, the different competencies it require. And we quite often focus on wilderness medicine or trauma, emergency medicine. But most of the stuff we deal with is primary care, or occasionally get a mass casualty incident. You need to look at things like triage, or maybe your evacuation route is blocked by a landslide or a flood or a security problem, and you end up doing prolonged field care on site by yourself without telemedicine, without diagnostic equipment. So you need this whole host of clinical and non-clinical skills to be current, competent and confident, or to be able to survive, thrive and operate in the environment. But yeah, it sounds like you've got an incredible career, and I see where the passion comes from. But following on from the polar stuff, remember the invite to Norway next year.
You've got me on the plane on that one, so I'm there. It doesn't take two invites, so no, I'm very much looking forward to that, and I really appreciate the invite. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It'd be incredible to have your experience on board. We'll test the kit as well. So
excellent.
I see the background and the passion, and that often takes us. That passion often creates entrepreneurs, because we see gaps in the capability, we see gaps in the market, not so much to make money, but to help patient care and improve practice. And a lot of our products and services have been developed because of that. So can you give us a little bit of background about TSG and where that was born, how it developed, and what your focus is as a company?
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. You talk to various people who are running companies in this area, and I mean, ultimately, all companies have to make money to survive and pay the bills. But there's so many companies in this sector that are driven to try and do the right thing and to try and get the edge to increase survivability. And really, that's what we're all about. The origins of TSG are what we call the jungle story. I mean, and I literally was sat in Brunei on doing a med cover for quite a difficult course. And in jungles, I'm sure a lot of you members have come across that there is something called deadfall, where the tree canopy will probably die about halfway up. And obviously, if that crashes down in the middle of the night into a bivouac area, you've got a real complex incident in your hand. And I was sort of mulling over how I'd deal with that. And the conclusion I came to was I probably had enough switched on people around me that we could probably get through the situation and do an okay job. Yeah. But we never had anything formalized or any process that we could look at the planning and the execution of, or even prove that plan had a chance to withstand reality. It was always very ad hoc. So when I went out from the jungle after that trip, I basically said to myself, look, I've got to find something better, because I'm in this position to do the job right, and I don't believe I'm prepared for this type of event. And my risk assessment was telling me that this event absolutely can happen and has happened. So when I went out, I couldn't find anything to solve that problem. And that really is when I started literally sticking bits of paper together and trying to come up with solutions. So that was the initial spark. I've never been to business school. I've done lots of courses on it now, but initially the seed of the business was to try and solve a problem that I was going to be faced with. So that's how we started. We're about 25 years old now. But basically what we try to do as a company, we are a development company, and the products that you see that we have are all our own developments and our own innovations. But we try to look to areas in the pre-hospital, often austere medicine area, that aren't serviced as good as they should be. Yeah. And we believe we could improve them. But what we can't do is just make something and say, we think it's better, we try and prove it's better as well. Mm-hmm. And there's obviously some objective ways that we can do that, and there's some subjective ways we can do that as well. But we look at that gap, we innovate into that gap, and if you look at then what does the company try to do as a company, it's basically about we try to maximize survival, mm-hmm. and we try to minimize suffering. And if our products don't fit those two things, we're really not interested. There's nothing wrong with being a Me Too company, but we're all about being ahead of the curve, innovating, improving care, and as I say, improving survival, minimizing suffering. And that is the foundation of everything that you do. If you ever go on any of our websites or blogs, you'll see that reiterated in everything we talk about. It's a major driver behind what we're involved in.
Fantastic. Interesting, you highlighted a key word there, or key phrase, risk assessment. Your whole approach to managing the situation was based on your risk assessment. That's something we talk about almost on every episode. You can't prepare unless you've done your risk assessment and you know what resources are available, the risks associated to the people, the activity, the environment. So that's interesting that we think alike there. And that's really key for any remote operation, because if you haven't done your homework and you by yourself with limited resources, it's going wrong.
And you know, it's so important. And certainly, if you were to talk to anybody coming into trying to get into this area of medicine, if I was to give them any advice, is get your prep right. You know, if you go into a jungle, know your fevers, know what are prevalent, because if your diagnostics are minimal, then you're going to have to fall back on the knowledge you've got of what things are most likely to happen. Because you know yourself, things that are most likely to happen. So you've got a better chance of getting the right decision. And 9 times out of 10, you get that right decision because you've done your research before it, and you know what's the most likely thing you're going to be faced with within that specific environment. So yeah, before you head out, research. It's so important given where, you know, the places that we look to operate.
I couldn't agree more. I focus quite a lot on the use of technology and taking technology to the field now, whether it be telemedicine with satellite-based messaging systems, portable Wi-Fi systems, ultrasound, lightweight 12-lead ECGs. These are great complements to the clinical skills and give you an extra picture to make that evacuation decision. Do we evacuate a patient? Do we not? The ramifications of doing it, aside from being very expensive, there are clinical ramifications if you get it wrong. But also, if you decide to go on foot or by helicopter, you're potentially putting the team at risk, going over remote terrain at night, river crossings, deadfall. So it's good if you can justify the decision, but you can't always rely on the technology. Batteries run out, batteries die because of the freezing temperatures, equipment gets damaged. So yeah, you're right, you need to fall back on the knowledge and specific to area knowledge, I think. But we first use your products, if we can dive straight into that. We first use your product, I think it was 2014. You first gave me a smart extract stretcher. And as like you, I bounce around tactical teams, close protection teams, wilderness, expedition, courses, operations. And I've trialed a multitude of different stretchers, all of which are either really heavy, really bulky, take up a lot of space in your rucksack or the entire rucksack, fill up the boot of your car. And I've never really found something that's fit for purpose until you sent me that package. And we trialed the smart extract stretcher, which I'll let you describe it, but in a nutshell, it's small, lightweight, robust. I've used it to extract people in the desert, dragging it along the desert floor. I've carried people down live volcanoes with it. I've carried it in a pouch at high altitude at 22,000 feet in the Chilean Andes. It's so small and lightweight, I can take it anywhere, versus other stretchers that aren't as versatile and I wouldn't take anywhere because of the size and bulk. So can you tell us a little bit about the smart extract? Because I think that's the base of all of the other modular systems that you build on, right?
Yeah, it's certainly one of the key brands, and you're right, the extract is the core of the modular aspects of all the other things that it can hang off if you need it to. Yeah. The key to, I think, designing equipment for remote medics is that there's 2 parts you need to think about. Is that it can be the best piece of kit in the world, but if the medic doesn't take it on the ground, it's not there, so it's not the best bit of kit in the world because it's just not there. And 2 words define if it will be there or not: size and weight. So it's whatever has to be designed has got to be acceptable, that whoever's deploying can look at it and go, that is an acceptable size and acceptable weight that I will put it in my kit and take it with me. So if you don't meet those criteria, it doesn't really matter what it does, it's not going. So and obviously robustness comes into that as well. So we've always got to fulfill those criteria no matter what we do. The extract's a really good example of where we tried and hopefully succeeded in to innovate into improving survivability. And the initial brief for this that we picked up on was when the British Army first deployed to the Second Iraq War, and Afghanistan, then very quickly we realised that the operational casualty profile was changing. We weren't dealing with a Cold War type explosive ballistic type injury. It was very much IED explosive driven.
Yeah.
And the profile of that casualty was a double or a triple amputee.
Absolutely.
Now, the difference there is if you're taking a small lightweight stretcher into play, the anatomical size of the soldier or the operator who's been hit by the IED has changed. They've gone from an average 6 foot person to 4'2".
Yep.
So what we had to try and work out was creating something small and lightweight enough. And by the nature of that, it usually has to be flexible as well, because bringing a rigid system in at that point, it's almost impossible to get it down to the really small size that we needed to do. So the brief really was to be able to take something, a point of wounding, and make it basically cocoon that casualty with the handles all in the right place to support the body parts. So that initial transportation from point of wounding to an area of safety, we would minimise movement. What we were finding before extract came along is we would respond to the incident, obviously understanding hemorrhaging is been noted as the thing we can intervene in most in to prevent death. We would do a lot of work getting that primary clot organised, getting on tourniquets or hemostats and everything working. But then if you pick somebody up who's been subjected to blast, we're now moving that limb around, we've got an unstable pelvis, we're creating secondary injuries, and we've taken that person close to death. The idea with the extract, trying to design it so we could get it to point of injury, and you're not always going to do it given the dynamics of where you're working, but where it was safe to do so you could, and then you could minimise the movement from point of injury to a safe space. But the design of it, we cocoon around somebody who had the profile of an IED explosion. So it was driven by a need, and we had to recognise, well, actually, if it's got to fit someone that size and we don't reduce it in length, everything's in the wrong place, and it won't work. And then if you don't get that right, you will get lots of secondary movement. Lots of secondary movement equals increased chance of death, and it's certainly increased suffering. So we had to work out how to square that circle and get the size, weight, and robustness correctly, but make sure anatomically we could get the length of it to reduce very simply as well. Because it's got to be intuitive, that's the other big thing. If it looks complicated, it is complicated.
It's not going to work, is it? It won't work when people are under pressure if it's complex.
But if it's simple, think again and make it simpler. I mean, that's another big mantra that we go on. It can't be simple enough. So yeah, that was the thinking behind it. And once we'd got the basic extract organised, and I'm really pleased to see that the British Army picked up on it really quick, and they now deploy that with 1 in 4 soldiers. So it's down at team medic level, at section level, so it's always close to point of wounding. So it's actually being deployed where it's intended. What we did after that was then we modularized it, so you could start with a very small one. You could apply a base to it, which is detachable. If you needed to drag more, you could get a floating module, a hypothermia module on it, build a med kit around it. But you don't have to have all that. You can just lock on as and where required, again, depending on what your risk assessment is and where it is you're deploying.
Brilliant. It's interesting you say that, design based on the changing epidemiology or the changing profile of trauma. I was looking at work as a volunteer in the Combat Support Hospital in Baghdad from 2005 to 2007, and we were getting between 10 and 20 casualties a night with multiple amputations, exactly as you say, from the horizontally launched explosive form projectiles or IEDs. And guys were coming in with 2, 3, sometimes 4 amputations. And yeah, you really need to cocoon and protect the tourniquets and prevent the blood clots from blowing out and the pain and the secondary injuries and any pelvic movement. So yeah, absolutely. The product's designed to fit the purpose is really key. Is that a smart extract I can see behind you on the table?
Yes, this is one nicely placed. But as you'll see, I mean, it weighs under a kilogram, so it is very light. It actually will take up to a ton. Now, patients don't weigh a ton, thankfully. Not most of them anyway. I've not come across one that's a ton yet. but it's incredible. We actually designed a very specific material around it called Duralite to take the weight it requires. So it's incredibly strong. But yeah, when you look at it, and you can compress that more if you need to, but you're talking about a foot in length, maybe 30 centimeters in length. It is a very small product, and as all medics like, it's a very easy thing to stuff in your rucksack because it's compressible. And you know, and those things make a difference because it says, yes, I can take that, as opposed to if it's shrink wrapped with sharp corners, it's then well, maybe I can't, because I can't get that compressed in, and it's taking space up that I don't have. So again, I suppose one of the things we do bring to the table, because we have been there and done it a lot of times, we know that these little things matter. That, you know, the ability to shove something and twist it around and make it fit, it's actually quite important.
100%, couldn't agree more. And I've carried that just attached to my belt kit or on the outside of a rucksack, but quite often I take it out of the pouch and stuff it into the bottom of my rucksack, and it really reduces the profile again, so you're more likely to carry it. You don't even notice it's there, to be honest. But yeah.
And it's understanding those little things that actually really matter when you've only got a limited capacity and you're prioritising your kit. You know, because anything that's slightly impractical is not going. So again, those are all the challenges that we, as designers, that we have to take on board.
Fantastic. So I mean, it was originally designed for that in mind, but it's perfectly suitable for a full-length casualty with all of their extremities in place, right? For any rescue situation.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's been used like that many times. And the other thing that is quite nice about it is that you can put pediatrics in it. I mean, not neonates, but you know, you're looking at your maybe 2 to 3 year old will easily fit inside it as well. So if you need something just to bundle a pediatric, or you walk into something like a disaster zone, you've got something that will fit all of the population. So I think that's quite important as well.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, I know the videos are available on the TSG Associates website, and we'll give the link later on. It'll also be on our website on the RedMed and the SOS page. But so there's videos on there showing it in a tactical situation, a military situation, used by the police, the speed of deployment, its packaging, it's just incredible. But exploring the tactical and the wilderness side a bit, as a certified tactical paramedic and TCCC instructor and a fellow of the Wilderness Medical Society, I often have to teach hypothermia prevention and management, whether it be accidental hypothermia in extreme cold environments or trauma-induced hypothermia. It's a real focus in both of those spheres at the moment, which translates across well to rescue, expedition and disaster. So we've looked on the military side. There's lots of commercial products that in the past have tried to mitigate hypothermia. And in the wilderness side, we always create the hypothermia wrap or the burrito de hypothermia with whatever's available in your rucksack to try and improvise, which is great if guys have got the equipment to improvise. But I understand, based on your research and based on a gap in all of these products, TSG have developed a hypothermia prevention and management system, which is modular with the Smart Extract Stretcher. That's the
the extract heat saver. Yes, we have, and it's been quite a journey to get this one, you know, researched correctly, then developed correctly, and again achieving size and weight. It's a really fascinating area, hypothermia management. Again, it was another area that we were looking at, and we questioned if the incumbent products were good enough. You know, and you know, sometimes you've got to go back to the simplest analogies to question why they're good enough. So if I take my kids camping, which I do like to do, and it's on a summer's night and it's a beautiful evening, I'm not going to give them a silver blanket to sleep under. I'm going to give them an adequate level of insulation, something underneath them, something on top of them that's going to keep them properly warm through the night. So on a perfect summer's evening with two completely uninjured people, I'm going to work out what insulation is required. And because we're often walking up the hills with the kids, I still don't have a lot of space, but I'm going to take that insulation with me. At no point am I ever selecting a foil system to say that's going to be okay for my kids to sleep in. Yeah. So if I'm making that assessment for perfectly healthy people on a fairly warm night, what I started to question is, why are we putting foil systems or systems with no insulation on people and saying that's hypothermia mitigation and treatment on people who are seriously injured, who we know due to serious injury are losing their natural mechanism to produce heat. And I said, that just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
You know, I wander across Greenland where every ounce of equipment is calculated to minimize what I'm dragging on my two pulks behind me. But 3/4 of my second pulk, my sledge, is my sleeping system, because I need that level of insulation. I've worked out that I cannot reduce that level of insulation in the environment I'm working in. At no point am I saying, well, this magic silver blankets, they'll work. So people you need insulation at all levels, and I think very importantly, to combat all areas of heat loss. And when we looked at what was out there, and what seems to be quite standardized in the industry, I was thinking, that doesn't really cut it for me. But we did have to prove it. So we found a few things, and we did a few things. The first thing we found was most of the systems out there at the moment don't combat all forms of heat loss. They'll usually give you a type of blanket that goes over someone or works as some sort of sleeping bag system. So they'll combat convection heat loss. They'll talk about combating and reflecting radiated heat loss, but I think this is really important, that injured people don't radiate heat, because injured people are compensating and pooling their blood, and cold, clammy skin doesn't radiate anything.
Yeah.
So radiation heat loss in the injured person is not, we're never going to be able to reflect stuff back, even if we can. So we've got convection, we've got evaporation, which I think is something we have to consider, but hugely and massive gap in this area is conduction heat loss to the ground.
Yes.
And again, go back to simple things and simple analogies, and why is it important? You look like a homeless person in the street, and what is the first thing they look to have? They will sit on a piece of cardboard, because they understand is that if they don't do that, they will get killed. But as standard, we do not have, most central systems I looked at as standard do not put something underneath them somewhere. They say you should, but it's a lottery whatever turns up. And we said that's not right as well. We should standardize our ability to combat conduction heat loss. And the complementary to that, it's a lot more comfortable for a casualty as well, because comfortable casualties are easier to deal with as well. I think we've got a duty of care that we take a really bad day and we incrementally start to make it better. So let's put them in something nice which feels good. Yeah. That sounds a simple thing, but that's basic human care, isn't it? Which is important. So that there was a question, and does the incumbent work? And those analogies of, would I give that to a child sleeping on a summer's night? Are the systems combating all forms of heat loss? And we had a big question mark on that one. So all good and well to say we think it doesn't work. What we had to do is try and work out if it didn't work. So what we decided to do was try and run a series, or certainly run an experiment, and publish the findings to try and evaluate that. So when you look at, again, a lot of the literature at the moment, there's very little literature looking at humans being cold and rewarming, which is obviously gold standard. There's quite a few models that look at taking sort of almost bottles of water, putting them into heating systems and watching cool and heat up and seeing if they retain heat. And there's some pig models as well out there. We wanted to gold standard, because I think if you can look at a human being in a hypothermic state, then work how systems work or don't work, that's what you should go for. So long story short, we got some willing volunteers. And I don't know how I quite couch this. I sort of said, would you like to come and do this for no pay at all and go hypothermic for me? And we actually got quite a few people saying yes. So, I'm not sure, maybe I said it in a strange Scottish accent they didn't understand, but we got, I think, 7 or 8 volunteers. I actually put myself through this one as well. We took them into a high fidelity training, Arctic training room, which was working between -2 and -4. Okay. We brought a very high medical faculty to oversee what we were doing.
Yeah.
Not only from a safety point of view and a clinical accuracy, we wanted it to be as independent as possible as well. because, you know, if we're going to say this works and this doesn't, it can't just be me doing that. That's not fair.
Yeah.
So we had a very high level faculty working with us, both from a medical point of view and a university point of view as well. And we took people down to 35 centigrade core. So we got them clinically hypothermic, working at -4. Then we put into a series of rewarming systems. We used a foil system. We used a sort of windproof roof system that's used in one of the more prevalent ones used in America, and we used our experimental system. We did core temperatures over a 2-hour period. We put thermal cameras on them to see where the heat was escaping, which was fascinating. Thermal cameras just don't lie. If that heat's not being retained, it will tell you because it glows. But every bit of glow on an existing system means that heat is not being retained for that casualty. We did comfort scores as well, you know, saying how do you feel in the system. 1 was incredibly uncomfortable, and 10 was I feel normal. And the other one, which was interesting, was we brought a specialist in polar medicine in to work in Arctic gloves to see if they could do chest examinations, cubicle fossa, and tunica checks as well, and seeing if there's any heat loss as you open things up. But we also checked functionality as well, because all good and well being a wonderful piece of kit, but if you can't do your medical stuff on it, it's a waste of time, isn't it?
So you were able to get access to the interventions whilst the casualty was protected and wrapped up.
Yeah. So we had to make sure with certainly the system we were developing, and that if we needed to do those 3 checks, that, and they're not these the only ones, these are the ones that were chosen by the expert that we brought in, is that you could actually still access your casualty. Because you know yourself, that's important. If it's a tough environment and it's slightly difficult to access your casualty, you tend to go towards the easier jobs, don't you? So we've got to make it as simple as possible still to access your casualty. So that was one of the things we worked on. How functional is this when, you know, one of the toughest tests for any functionality is wearing mitts. So we had somebody at -4 wearing mitts doing clinical examinations. I suppose the bottom line, what we found is that the predominant systems in the market, the foils and the most that they were just the windproof materials that were being used, just weren't working. We got, and if anybody would like to look at the data more, we can run a presentation on this. What we found is with the system that we had designed, the heat saver, we had a mattress underneath here. We targeted fibers around the core of the body because we were looking at survivability more than overall comfort. So we had more fibers around the core than we did on the legs. We had a windproof system, and we also played around a little bit with active heating as well, which was quite interesting. But what we were doing was basically looking at all forms of heat loss, combating them, and then engineering the equipment so it became micro-sized. Just if people would like, the size of the equipment we came down to was this. So you can see it's, if I was to compare that against an extract, we have a system that produced very significant good clinical results on rewarming people as opposed to the uncomfort at the moment. So yeah, that was the story behind it. A lot of research, the best part of 2 years, big clinical oversight. We're just finishing writing up the academic paper on it that we'll put forward to publishing in the next couple of weeks. But again, if you go on our site, there are various interviews with me looking at the data and discussing the data. And if anybody would like more information on the actual results that we've got, that you know, more than welcome to present that. But it is fascinating. It's probably worth talking. We also found, obviously, if you're dealing with an injured person, you probably were going to have to generate active heat, because we know we've lost that internal capability to generate our own heat. We found that heat cells are very suspect in the cold. When we first took them in, they heated up very, very slowly. And given some of the evacuation times we wanted to work on, they were just too slow. And the only way we got them working was to have them open for about 40 to 50 minutes in ambient temperature and then bring them in. We also found, instead of putting a whole blanket over someone, we found if we concentrated the heat cells around, wrapped them around the abdomen, under the kidneys and under the axilla, we got good results. So we could carry less heat cells So again, space and weight, but we got a better result. And I think the key we found is if you've got minimal insulation, pack it around the core of the body, because that's the bit you want to survive, and that's the bit you want to preserve at a proper temperature. So the more insulation you get around the core, the better results you're going to get. And that's a major finding. So even if you don't have all this lovely kit we've designed, if you've got minimum kit in a team, focus on the core of the body and really focus on getting something underneath someone as well. Get them off that ground and get them well insulated with whatever you've got, but do that quickly as well. Because the best heat is the casualties heat. To regenerate it is difficult and hugely energy intensive for the injured person.
Absolutely fantastic, Colin. I'm so passionate about this, and there are so many courses that look at treating the injuries and then evacuating the patient without actually mitigating hypothermia, which accidental hypothermia is a challenge in itself, but trauma-induced hypothermia leading into the lethal triad of acidosis, hypothermia, and coagulopathy is really, you're fighting a losing battle in remote areas with limited resources unless you can prevent it rather than treat it. So
I think you've got that right. The prevention, and one of the things we've tried to focus on is getting that as close to point of wounding as possible.
Yeah.
But again, just so important, the lethal triad is, we focus so much time on stopping life-threatening bleeds, but we know if we get cold, we don't clot.
Yeah.
So you've got to have good wound management, but you've also got to have prevention of hypothermia, because you can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
Because you undo all the work that you're doing if you don't do it. So
vicious
so
cycle.
important. Yeah.
And when we teach the hypothermia wrap in wilderness medicine, it's so resource intensive. We do cover the core concepts. We prevent the heat loss through conduction using roll mats or camping mats. We get the casualty in 2 or 3 sleeping bags. We wrap them in a tarp or a nylon or the outer skin of the tent, which works great to mitigate hypothermia if you're using that platform while you assess the patient or while you coordinate evacuation. But if you don't have all of that equipment, then you're back to square one. Or once you wrap the patient up in a rope to then use that hypothermia wrap as an extraction platform, you've then got no access to the patient. So you have to undo all of the knots, which takes time, then exposes the patient to the elements again. And it goes around in circles. So it sounds like the heat saver addresses all of these, prevents heat loss through conduction, evaporation, radiation, etc. And you've still got access to the patient, and you can still use it as a carry platform.
Absolutely. I think anything that's small and lightweight, there's always bits of compromise on it. So you've got to understand this. We can give you a massive system which will cover everything. So there's always tiny compromises with anything that's small and lightweight, but it will address the key areas of heat loss, which is what we're after. There is no compromise with what we put underneath them. The insulate mattress that we've designed is absolutely brilliant. It just works. And from a comfort level, from a size level, from an insulation level, it works really well. The heat's, put the heat sealant, covers your core, and then we get you covered from the weather with the element sheet. The other area I think is really important, and it's really simple, is absorbing of fluids, because injured people create fluids everywhere, don't they? They just do. And carrying something as simple as an incontinence pad. There's all sorts of Gucci commercial things you can get for fluid absorbency, but a few incontinence pads, if you expect there's going to be prolonged field care, and you do not want your patient laid in fluid, which we know will rip the heat out of them and be incredibly uncomfortable, then just taking some incontinence pads so we soak up underneath them and throw another new one in. It's low tech, it's not expensive, but it could make a big difference in keeping core body temperature right.
That's a really good point. I think once we start to get into applying critical care into prolonged field care, if you've got access to a Foley catheter, that's all well and good, but not everybody has that or is able to do that intervention. And cold, wet clothing really just compounds heat loss, doesn't it? So yeah, that's a really great idea. packing pads around the patient to absorb the liquids, even if it's just the sweat from diaphoretic skin. That's a great point. Anything you can do to absorb the moisture and protect from the environment, from the wind and the rain, etc., is really going to help. Fantastic. So it sounds like the TCCC guidelines changed. Well, I say it sounds like, I know the TCCC guidelines changed last year to add an emphasis or a focus on the addition of insulation into any of the hypothermia prevention kits. And that can be literally just packing clothing around the patient, underneath the patient. But eventually the users are going to need to use that clothing. The soldiers, the buddies, the rescue team are going to need to use that clothing or their rucksacks as part of the mission. But your product encompasses all of this. Are you able to show us the equipment? Have you got the equipment?
Yes.
To hand? A quick.
Yes, absolutely. I can whisk you across and give you a quick 5-minute demo if that would work for you.
Absolutely.
Let me take you across. Just before I do that, so this is the piece of kit we'll be talking about, the Extract SR Beat Saver. So we've got a little demonstration across here. Let me take that across.